we're learning more details about what unfolded on that day. Mehdi Hassan had an interview with an IDF spokesperson where he was pressing him on, some of the falsehoods that have now been proven to have come from the Israeli government. And there was a bit of a revelation here that was rather interesting. Let's take a listen to how this all went out.
Those numbers are provided by Hamas. There's no independent verification. And secondly, more importantly, you have no idea how many of them are Hamas terrorists, combatants, and how many are civilians. Hamas would have you believe that they're all civilians, that they're all children. And here we have to say something that isn't said enough. Hamas, until now, we're destroying their military machine, and with that, we're eroding their control. But up until now, they've been in control of the Gaza Strip. And as a result, they control all the images coming out of Gaza. Have you seen one picture of a single dead Hamas terrorist in the fighting in Gaza? Not one. Is that by accident, or is that because Hamas can control the information?
You asked me a question and you
Gaza.
said you would be brief. I haven't, you're right, but I have seen lots of children with my own lying eyes being pulled from the rubble.
Because they're the pictures Hamas wants you to see. Exactly my point, Mehdi. They're the pictures Hamas wants.
But they're also people that your government has killed. You accept that, right? You've killed children, or do you deny that?
No, I do not. I do not. First of all, you don't know how those people died, those children. Oh, wow. First of all, we don't want to see a single child killed.
Okay, here's my question for you, Mark. You say, I agree with you.
So you have two pieces there that are very noteworthy. Number one, he won't admit that children have been killed.
Yeah.
I mean,
there's no reason to do that.
What kind of a fantasy land do you think we're all, like, how stupid do you think that we are? How many of these horrifying images have we seen? We know that the population of Gaza is nearly 50% children.
Yeah.
We know that the, death toll is, I think, roughly 40% children. So to deny they've killed any kids, that is another level. By the way, I want to correct myself. I said an IDF spokesperson. This is actually senior advisor to the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The other part, though, that was really noteworthy here is you'll recall the original death count on October 7th was roughly 1,400, and then they revised it down to 1,200. And he says that that's because some of the bodies that were burned beyond recognition that they had assumed were Israeli citizens were actually Hamas militants. So that was another, important revelation there. And just in the interest of accuracy and what actually unfolded on October 7th raises a lot of questions, too, about exactly what the response was and what that looked like.
And to that point, there's just absolutely no reason to not answer the question about children. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense from the line that Israel used. And I think, by the way, rightfully so, that in so many senses, Hamas put children in this situation, that Hamas knew exactly what was going to happen after October 7th. So you can't have two be true at the same time. You can't say Hamas is putting their own people in this awful situation, but also that these children are not in an awful situation. There's absolutely no reason to take the first line when, first of all, the entire world. And by the way, I was talking about this with Ryan last week. It's really frustrating because there's no, we're going to talk about this in the next segment, but we need to, Western journalists are not in Gaza. Journalists who are in Gaza are in grave danger. And that means over here on this side of the world, we have to take what the Israeli government is saying seriously. They are making that very difficult, and they have been doing that for years. But in a situation like this, when you cannot even concede that children have been killed, the trust that you desperately need to build with American audiences, with Western audiences, with British audiences, with everyone around the world that is not in Gaza right now is severely damaged. And it's a totally unforced error.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think Israel has decided, because I've been thinking about this, their propaganda is so sloppy.
It's been bad.
Like, it's actually astonishing to me. We're going to talk later about that CNN report where they were with, the IDF guy, and he's showing them what he purports to be evidence that this other hospital, not Al-Shifa, a different hospital, I think it's called, I don't remember the name of it, the Children's Hospital, that it was used by Hamas militants. And, he's pointing to baby bottles, and it's like, yeah, it's a children's hospital where people are seeking refuge. But the real crowning moment is when he reveals this Arabic list that he says is where the terrorists were recording their names of when they were watching the hostages. And immediately, people who actually speak Arabic look at this and are like, it's literally just a calendar.
Right.
And again, I am quite sure that the IDF has plenty of Arabic speakers available to them. I'm also quite sure, by the way, that CNN has plenty of Arabic speakers available to them. So to have the level of propaganda be that incredibly sloppy is just, to me, completely absurd. It's one of the things that Mehdi presses him on. But I think that they really, number one, are just so used to, all of this is for a US audience, right? They know that international opinion, they don't really care about international opinion. They just care about a US audience. I think there's been such lockstep support for Israel across both parties for so long that they never felt the need to have the propaganda be actually very good. And now, really, they're only pitching it to Joe Biden. And Joe Biden seems to be buying it all hook, line, and sinker. So I guess they don't feel the need to up their game in terms of the propaganda efforts here, because the one guy that they need to keep on their side, they seem to be doing the job just fine on that. I saw some people commenting on Twitter that basically, like, the one person who believes all of this is Joe Biden. But that's the only person they need to believe all of this. So I guess there you go.
Although, as we were just talking about, they're not, it seems, entirely happy with the U.S. pushing so hard for a hostage deal. And they don't seem entirely happy with the Biden administration's call for a humanitarian ceasefire. That seems to have, obviously been a point of tension. But I also think, and this is a really interesting point, actually, that you just brought up, the intense level of propaganda that any country would engage in. But the sloppiness and the propaganda, I also think, is partially because they're doing so much of it. I don't know if you've noticed, it's like, obviously we're in the social media era, so they're trying to be completely aggressive so that when something gets posted on X and all of the journalists are there and narratives start getting crafted, that they're on top of it, they're in front of it. But it's been very sloppy. It's a really strange thing to watch happen in real time on social media, and I think that's where some of this has just looked so ham-fisted. Is that they're trying so hard in the middle of a war to be winning the propaganda race, and it's just it's very odd to watch happen.
The other thing is, I think, frankly, that their actions in Gaza, where you have this overwhelming civilian death toll, where you have so many children being massacred, where you have daily attacks on, we can't even keep track, on schools, refugee camps, hospitals, ambulances, you name it, civilian infrastructure, and it's been destroyed. Like, they know that on its face is not actually defensible. And so that's how you end up with this preposterous attempt to be like, well, I don't really know that we killed any kids. You can't prove that we killed any kids. And that's also the reason why they've so aggressively cut off communications. And also, by the way, why they've targeted journalists. I think the number is 50 now, journalists in Gaza who have been killed. And by the way, there's been, virtual silence from the American press, which claimed during the Trump administration care so much about freedom of the press and protecting journalists, et cetera. Pretty much total silence when it comes to the fact that so many journalists have been killed, more than any other conflict that we've seen. There's another interesting new detail, and I'll phrase this very delicately, about October 7th that also came out. This was from a Haaretz report, and let's go ahead and put this up on the screen from our own Ryan Grimm, sort of summarizing what came out here. This was from, just to be clear, it was from the Hebrew version of the paper. This is a translation from Google Translate, so it may be a little imprecise, and I'll get to that in a minute. But the bottom line here is, one of the greatest scenes of horror and atrocities was that Rave music festival. And this Haaretz investigation found that, number one, organizers originally planned to end the event on Friday, but got permission to extend it midweek from the army. And this goes to the idea that actually Hamas didn't even know this festival was going on. They just sort of happened upon it, and then, of course, killed a lot of civilians and unleashed horrors there. Hamas did not know about the music festival, only learning about it after breaching Israeli territory. This assessment is backed up by a body cam footage of a terrorist asking a captured civilian where the bad guys are. Now, that part in particular seems to be a poor translation. Apparently, the Hebrew word for bad guys and the Hebrew word for one of the kibbutz that they did plan to attack and did, in fact, attack is very similar. So the Hebrew language speakers that I saw said, no, this was actually not asking where the bad guys are. They were asking for directions to this kibbutz. But this last one is really key and has got a lot of people's attention. An Israeli attack helicopter fired on terrorists and also killed some of the partygoers. which opens up a real question, Emily, of, how many of the civilians who were horribly massacred on October 7th, how much of that was friendly fire? It's a question that a lot of people have been asking from the beginning and were completely shut down, like this was off the table. But, in the interest of accuracy and understanding the events that unfolded on this horrific and fateful day, it's important to know exactly what the response was, what the death toll was, and how all of this unfolded.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And again, that's why, the Israeli government, the IDF, whatever side you take in this conflict, obviously, it's no easy task to be in the middle of a war right now and to also be managing, the international press and the international community and all of that. But the Israeli government has done itself absolutely no favors by saying things like, that's why the children point on Mehdi's show is such an unforced error, because when you have situations like this, and the Haaretz account is so far the only account we have of the helicopters and the civilians, that doesn't mean it won't be verified. It very well could be verified, in fact, because as some of Israel's defenders were saying last night on X, it's pretty believable, right? When you're in the middle of this insane attack, that sadly there's going to be people caught in the crossfire. It's hard to even talk about those sorts of things. But if that's the case, your trust with the public and your trust with American benefactors, the people who are sending military assistance, the people who are in the UN, whatever it is, your trust should be ironclad. And when you are caught in the middle of just ridiculous talking points, you are doing yourself no favors whatsoever. And this isn't to say that we should all just be able to blindly trust the Israeli government. It is to say that the Israeli government should be doing absolutely everything in its power to ensure that that trust is coming from a serious place, and to give the public reason to trust their lawmakers who are saying that they trust the Israeli government. Biden last week saying that as it pertains to the hospital, he really believes the intelligence, but he won't say what it is, that this is a Hamas central command site. Well, if he's saying that he has intelligence, that the Israeli government has intelligence, and the public then has to trust that, while the Israeli government is taking such ridiculous lines in the public, that is incredibly deleterious to the cause that Israel wants to promote.
I mean, I trust the Israeli government as much as I trust Hamas, which is to say not at all. And so it makes it impossible to really know what's happening on the ground. You have to trust, the doctors at the hospital, and take the word of the ordinary civilians who are there, and the few remaining journalists who have not been killed, who remain in the Gaza Strip. But, one final point on why this music festival piece matters, because I can see people being like, yeah, okay, friendly fire, what does it matter? Obviously, Hamas came and massacred people. We know that, and no one is denying that here. But let me just say that part of what has been used, in fact, the entirety of the case that has been used to justify the indiscriminate bombing campaign, the complete leveling of Gaza City, now moving into the south where they told everyone to flee, the very high civilian death rate, higher, by the way, than even the civilian death rate that Hamas inflicted on October 7th. What has been used to justify that is the details of the horrors and atrocities that were committed on October 7th. Mm-hmm. And so it's important we know those details, and we know what is actually true and what is actually false, because that is the emotional case that they're making to justify committing essentially like daily war crimes in their prosecution of this war on Gaza. So that's why getting these details, and apart from just knowing the historical record and having an accurate picture, that is the additional layer of why it matters to get these things straight. And that report from Haaretz, it came from an Israeli police investigation. So it has a high level of credibility here. And it also, as people point out, it does make sense in terms of the response, and also in terms of some of the images that came out of the extent of the destruction, which it seems unlikely Hamas would have been able to execute on their own. Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.